Hello, I'm Patty Marino, and I'm interviewing Martha McQuin, and it's October 5th, 2013. Martha, would you tell us about your family and when you were born?
How far back do you want to go?
As far as you can remember.
Well, some of the things that my mother did, because she had to, when her father died, he had his sunstroke when she was 12. And he lived a year after that, but he wasn't able to do anything. But he did teach her how to farm and how to handle animals and those kinds of things. So when she died, she was the eldest of all her whole family. There were 7 children. And she had a younger brother he was the youngest of the children. And she had a sister that died her named Emma, that died when Emma was 8. So my mother farmed just like a man for many, many years. She farmed 80 acres. And then after she got more acquainted with the farming, she bought another 80 acres and farmed 160 acres. And so that meant that when the farmers exchanged wood, changed their working times if you had to have thrashers, then she'd have to pay them. And so she told them one year that it would be a lot better if they would just exchange, because she worked like a man anyway. So they agreed with that. So she exchanged work then for many years, and she married Dad then when she was 25.
Now, where was this farm, Martha? Where was the farm your mother was farming?
East of Elmwood.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so they lived there until my mother's mother died. And of course, Grandma would never let any man come in and do any farming, because it just wasn't proper in those days, and that's why they never had a man that helped with the farm work.
Because your mother was farming and they didn't want a man there?
Pardon me?
Because your mother was farming, they didn't want a man?
Yeah, they wouldn't want a man there. So anyway, then she met my dad, and then Fred then at that time was probably about 12, and so Dad taught him how to farm, and so they farmed together then for some years. And then when Grandma died, she left the farm to the son, as was the custom in those days. Instead of leaving it to my mother, it went to the son. And so, of course, then my dad left the farm then, and they went to Hemingport, Nebraska for a year. They intended to stay there for a while, but they didn't stay because the air was lighter there, just kind of like it is in Colorado. And she couldn't breathe very well, so they come back to Elmwood and went back to farming for all those years. So I grew up then as a farmer's child and went to country school for several years. We went different schools. My dad never owned a farm. He would rent, and then if he didn't particularly like what was there, he would move, and we would move and go somewhere else. So I was educated in more than one country school at that time.
Tell us your parents' names and your siblings' names.
My father's name was William Senf, and my mother's name was Mary Ann. And she worked in the farm just the same as she always did. She wore overalls, which we didn't see women do much in those days. And then as we grew up, we all were taught how to work. really. And we learned how to when the grain was shocked, we all learned how to shock grain in the field, and we use the hoe to cut out the weeds when the corn was too high for the cultivator to go through. And then, but every day we were expected to have our chores done while Mom and Dad and the boys were in the field. Well, then we had to have, of course, my younger brother he was just 15 months older than I was, and so we worked together a lot. But we had to be sure that the chickens were fed, the eggs were gathered, the hogs were fed, the cows, Mother milked the cows. When she'd come in, she'd milk the cows until we got old enough that we could help with that. And for years, we just worked as regular farmers, and we took care of the cattle and the hogs and stuff, and we had better have that done when they come in from the field, and usually that work was all done. And my dad even taught me how to, for the kitchen stove, we used wood from fallen trees, and they would saw them up, Dad and the boys would saw them up in size just fit for the cook stove. And then he taught even us girls how to use a wedge in those stumps that they had, and split them up into wood to burn in the kitchen stove. And so that turned out to be pretty handy, because sometimes they didn't have time when they went to the field to get the stuff cut up so that we could use it in the kitchen stove. And I was just 10, and every fall in this particular school, they would give 2 weeks of school vacation because so many of the older kids would stay out and help their folks on the farm. And so we would have that time on our hands. I had an older sister. She was 7 years older than I, but she was in high school at that time, and she was staying with a friend because they couldn't run her in. We were 7 miles from Elmwood at that time. And so Dad built me a little stool so that I'd be tall enough to look into the pots on the stove. And Mother baked her own bread. And she used 48 pounds of flour every week for bread and biscuits and pancakes and all that kind of stuff. And so she'd have the bread ready to go, and she'd show me how to punch it down and how to put it into loaves. And then in the oven, she had a black pan that held 6 loaves of bread, and it was just fit the size of the inside of that oven. And so she showed me how to do that, how much wood to put in the stove, how much cobs and stuff, because you didn't have any other way of knowing. We didn't have baking times on our stove at that time. And so I cooked, I did the bread, and I would also peel the potatoes and whatever Mom wanted for supper. So I said to my husband one time, after all those years, I said, I learned to cook when I was 10 years old. He said, well, it does look like you learned by now. He always had a good sense of humor.
Martha, could you just tell us your siblings' names and the order of their birth?
Pardon me?
Your siblings, your brothers and sisters' names, and who was the older down to the youngest?
Okay, my sister Esther was the oldest. She was married to Marion Christensen. She lived here in Plattsmouth. My brother Carl was next, and he lived out on Lincoln Avenue, and his son lives out there at this time. And then my brother Willard drowned when he was 20. He worked for the quarry at that time they were trying to get the Missouri River deepened. They were putting in those posts, whatever they call those, to cause the water to be deeper instead of flowing as wide as it was. And they had barges in there, and he was the boss of how much tonnage they could put on there. And he wore boots with steel toes. And on this particular day, we don't know what happened, but he misstepped somehow and he fell in, and it was what they called the June rise, even though it was July. The water was very, very high, and he was not an expert swimmer, and the current was very swift, and he had a friend from the University of Nebraska that was an expert swimmer, and he jumped in and tried to get Willard out, but they couldn't find him. And so, and the quarry did not have owner. I think they were thinking the Olson Quarries is what it's called. I don't remember that name very well. But they had a canoe but didn't have any paddles, so they didn't have anything that they could use to save him. And so my dad would go down there every day and say, and look at the river, and try to diagnose where my brother was. And so one day he said to Sheriff Reed, who was the sheriff in Cass County at that time, he said, I believe he's in this section. And he pointed out where the piling was put. And he said, I think he's in there. And the sheriff said, well, Bill, we've checked that, and there wasn't anybody in there. He said, I just had the feeling that's where he was. Well, that's where he was. So we had to bury him very quickly because his body was all swelled, all water soaked.
Did he eventually, his body come up out of the river? Is that
No, they
I don't
went
know
back why it was he didn't float, but he was in that piling, and I think maybe that's what kept him. He couldn't get out. It was in between that piling stuff. And so anyhow, then so we buried him at 6 o'clock at night because that was a thing. So then
you were going through your brothers and sisters, Willard, and then you were next, Martha. You were the next child of your parents.
Yeah, and I was next to Willard. We were very close. We were such good friends along with everything else, because if he had a pop gun, I had one. If he had a bow and arrow, I had one. If anything that he had that was good to play with, then I had one. Dad always saw that we had one, so he was a good friend of mine. So I missed him a great deal after he was gone.
Who were younger than you, Martha? You had a couple more.
And then below me was, I was the fourth child, and then Edith, my sister Edith, she married a Dasher and lived here in Plattsmouth. And then I had my sister Clara, who married John Stoll, who was in Plattsmouth here at the time that she married him. And they built a house in Omaha they went up on, it's been so long ago, but when they built this house in this area, there were all this alfalfa fields and that kind of stuff, and now it's all covered with houses and businesses and all that kind of thing. And
Tell us how you met Lowell.
Pardon?
How did you meet Lowell?
Well, it was really a blind date. My sister and her husband lived in they had an apartment in the hotel there in Union. And